Emma Brooks had always believed that kindness, no matter how small, could make a difference. At just 25 years old, she worked tirelessly at Maggie's Diner, a small, run-down restaurant in the heart of New York City. The chipped paint on the walls and the flickering neon "open" sign outside mirrored her struggles, yet she never let them define her. She greeted every customer with a warm smile, her tired eyes betraying the long shifts she endured just to make ends meet. The diner wasn't much, but it was all she had. With rent to pay and a younger sister relying on her to cover school fees, Emma had no choice but to work herself to the bone. Some nights, exhaustion weighed on her so heavily that she could barely keep her head up, but she never allowed her hardships to affect the way she treated others. She had a gift, not just for serving customers, but for making people feel seen and valued. No matter how rude, impatient, or dismissive they were, Emma believed that a little kindness could go a long way. What made her truly stand out, though, was what she did after her shift ended. While other employees rushed home to rest, Emma stayed behind, carefully gathering whatever leftover food the kitchen would allow her to take. She wrapped up sandwiches, packed containers of soup, and stuffed slices of bread into paper bags before heading out into the cold. Every night, as she walked the dimly lit streets on her way home, she made quiet stops along the way, handing out meals to the homeless people she had come to know by name. To her, it was a small act of kindness. To them, it was everything. She never expected anything in return, no praise, no thanks. It was simply what she believed was right. Even on the nights when she barely had enough for herself, she still found a way to give. Despite her own struggles, Emma never complained. She had dreams far bigger than her circumstances, dreams of one day opening a cafe where anyone, rich or poor, could come in and find a warm meal and a welcoming smile. For now, though, that dream seemed impossibly far away. She told herself that as long as she could help others in small ways, it was enough. What she didn't know was that her kindness was about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. One particularly cold evening, the city was drowning in a relentless downpour. Rain lashed against the sidewalks, pooling in the cracks of the pavement, turning the streets into a shimmering reflection of neon lights. Emma Brooks clutched her thin jacket tightly around her, the fabric already soaked through, as she hurried home after another exhausting shift at Maggie's Diner. The weight of the long day pressed against her shoulders, but as always, she pushed forward, her thoughts drifting between the tips she had earned, the bills waiting at home, and whether she had enough left to buy groceries for the week. Just as she was about to pass the bus stop near the corner of 5th and Main, something made her pause. A small figure was curled up beneath the shelter, knees hugged tightly to his chest, shivering violently in the freezing rain. Emma's heart clenched as she stepped closer, peering down at the boy who couldn't have been older than 8. His clothes were soaked, his small frame trembling as he tried to shield himself from the cold. His face was pale, his lips nearly blue, and his eyes, when they finally lifted to meet hers, held a hollow sadness that no child should ever have to carry. She crouched down beside him, her voice soft despite the concern threading through it. "Hey there, sweetheart. Are you okay? Where are your parents?" The boy hesitated, his tiny fingers gripping the sleeves of his wet jacket as he shook his head. "I don't have anyone," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm hungry." Emma didn't think twice. Without a word, she extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the boy took it. His fingers were ice-cold against hers, a reminder of just how vulnerable he was in this moment. Together, they stepped back into the storm, the rain drenching them both as she led him toward the one place she knew she could give him warmth, if only for a little while. When they reached Maggie's Diner, she ushered him inside, the heat of the restaurant instantly thawing the chill from their bones. Grabbing the closest blanket she could find, she wrapped it around his small shoulders before hurrying into the kitchen. Moments later, she placed a steaming bowl of soup in front of him. As he took his first spoonful, his hands still trembling, Emma felt an unfamiliar warmth bloom in her chest. He finally looked up at her, a flicker of gratitude shining in his tired eyes. She didn't need to hear him say, "Thank you," to know what this meal meant to him. But what she didn't realize was that someone else had been watching. Across the street, parked just beyond the reach of the flickering streetlights, a sleek black car sat idle, its engine humming softly. Inside, a man leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on the diner window, his thoughts caught somewhere between curiosity and something deeper. He had seen her. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he knew he would not forget her. Daniel Carter had not planned on being in this part of the city that night. After a long, exhausting day of high-stakes meetings and relentless negotiations, he had taken an uncharacteristic detour, letting the quiet of the rainy streets soothe his overworked mind. The city had never felt like home to him, not really. It was a place of business, of constant motion, of people chasing money and power, yet somehow never feeling satisfied. He had built an empire, amassed wealth beyond measure, and surrounded himself with luxury, yet there were nights, like this one, when he found himself feeling strangely hollow. As he drove through the near-empty streets, his mind drifting aimlessly, something caught his eye. A young woman kneeling beside a small boy, her soaked jacket clinging to her as she spoke to him gently. Daniel's foot hesitated on the gas pedal as he watched her extend her hand, offering warmth and kindness to a child who had nothing. He had seen people walk by the homeless countless times before, pretending not to notice, too caught up in their own lives to care. But she was different. She didn't hesitate, didn't look around to see if anyone was watching, didn't perform her kindness like an act to be seen. She simply acted, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. He watched as she led the boy through the rain, her steps purposeful but unhurried, as if she had already decided that whatever else she had planned that night no longer mattered. The way she instinctively wrapped a blanket around him inside the diner, the way she placed a steaming bowl of soup in front of him and waited to make sure he ate, it was all so effortless, so genuine. Daniel leaned back against the leather seat of his car, unable to look away. He didn't know this woman, but something about her had captured his attention in a way he couldn't explain. For the first time in years, he felt something stir within him, something unfamiliar yet undeniable. It wasn't just admiration, though that was certainly part of it. It was curiosity. Who was she? What kind of person gave so much when she clearly had so little herself? He didn't have an answer, but as he scribbled down the name of the diner on the notepad beside him, he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't the last time he would see her. The days blurred together in a cycle of exhaustion and routine for Emma Brooks. Between juggling double shifts at Maggie's diner and taking care of her younger sister, she barely had time to think about the little boy she had helped that night. But the memory of his face, the way his tired eyes had brightened as he ate, lingered with her. It was a small moment in the grand scheme of her life, but it meant something. She hoped he had found a safe place to rest, though deep down, she knew the city was not always kind to those who had no one. There was a quiet loneliness in knowing she might never see him again, never truly know if he was okay, but she reminded herself that sometimes, all one could do was offer kindness and hope it was enough. Still, the weight of her own struggles remained. Rent was due soon, groceries were running low, and the bills kept piling up faster than she could count. She had learned long ago not to dwell on these things too much. If she did, the crushing reality of her situation would be too much to bear. Across the city, Daniel Carter found himself unable to shake the image of Emma from his mind. He had tried to go about his usual business, meetings, calls, carefully calculated deals, but something had shifted within him. He had spent years building his empire, accumulating more wealth than most people could dream of, yet it had never occurred to him to stop and truly look at the world outside his glass office walls. He had never been the type to believe in fate or chance, but that night, watching Emma, had felt like something more. He had seen kindness before, but rarely like this, quiet, unassuming, expecting nothing in return. It had left him with a question he couldn't ignore: what would drive someone like her to give so much when she had so little? He needed to know more. He needed to see her again. That decision was what brought him, days later, through the doors of Maggie's diner. Dressed in a tailored suit that felt out of place among the worn booths and laminated menus, he walked inside, the soft jingle of the bell above the door drawing Emma's attention. She was balancing a tray of plates, her hair slightly frizzy from the heat of the kitchen, but the warmth in her smile never wavered. For a brief moment, Daniel simply stood there, watching her, struck by the quiet grace in the way she moved. He hadn't planned what he would say, hadn't thought beyond the pull that had brought him here, but as her gaze met his, one thought became clear: this woman was different, and he needed to understand why. Emma barely noticed the man at first. The soft jingle of the diner's entrance bell was a familiar sound, blending into the background of clinking plates, murmured conversations, and the sizzle of the grill. She had worked at Maggie's diner long enough to know that people came and went without much thought, just another face in the crowd. But as she glanced up from clearing a table, something about him made her pause. He didn't fit in here, not in the way the usual customers did. His dark suit was crisp, his shoes polished, his posture carrying an air of quiet confidence. He looked like he had stepped out of a world so far removed from hers that she almost wondered if he had walked into the wrong place. Yet, when their eyes met, there was something strangely familiar about him, though she couldn't quite place why. She quickly shook off the thought, forcing herself to focus. Customers were customers, no matter how out of place they seemed. With a practiced smile, she walked over, balancing a tray of empty glasses as she greeted him. "Welcome to Maggie's. Have a seat anywhere you'd like." Daniel's gaze followed her for a moment before he chose a booth near the back, a spot that gave him a full view of the diner. He hadn't fully planned what he would say, hadn't even decided how to explain why he was here. All he knew was that he wanted to see her again, to watch her in her element, to understand why she had affected him in a way no one else ever had. As she moved around the diner, he noticed the way she treated every person who walked through the door. She greeted an elderly man by name, setting down his usual cup of coffee before he even had to ask. She helped a young mother struggling to keep her toddler entertained, sliding over a small paper and crayons to keep the child occupied while she ate. She laughed softly with a regular, patting his shoulder as she refilled his drink. There was no act, no forced kindness. It was simply who she was. When she finally reached his table, notepad in hand, she smiled the same way she had smiled at everyone else, despite the weariness in her eyes. "What can I get you today?" Daniel hesitated for only a moment before replying, "I'll take the special. But only if you promise to take a break and have coffee with me later." Emma blinked, caught off guard, but recovered quickly. "I'm sorry," she said with a polite chuckle, "but I don't usually take breaks during my shift." He expected that answer, but the way she said it made him admire her even more. "Then just the special," he said simply, handing her the menu. As she walked away, he leaned back in his seat, watching her, already certain that meeting her was going to change everything. Emma didn't think much about the stranger after she took his order. The diner was busy, as it always was during the lunch rush, and she had too many things to juggle to dwell on why a man in an expensive suit had chosen to eat here. Still, there was something about him, something in the way he watched her, not with impatience like some customers, not with judgment, but with an almost quiet curiosity. She dismissed it as nothing more than a wealthy man passing through, maybe someone who had grown tired of overpriced meals in high-rise restaurants and wanted something simpler for a change. She had seen all kinds of people walk through these doors before, and once they paid their bill, they usually never looked back. There was no reason to think this would be any different. Yet, as she moved around the diner, balancing trays, refilling coffee cups, and offering her usual warm greetings to customers, she couldn't shake the feeling that his gaze lingered a little longer than most. Daniel, for his part, wasn't sure what he had expected when he walked into Maggie's, but the more he watched Emma, the more his curiosity deepened. He had assumed that what he had seen that night in the rain had been a fleeting moment of kindness, a rare glimpse into someone's best self. But now, sitting here, he realized that kindness wasn't just a moment for her, it was her way of life. She gave to everyone without hesitation, whether it was a smile, a kind word, or a simple act of generosity. Even as exhaustion pulled at her features, even as she moved from table to table without pause, there was never a moment when she allowed herself to be anything less than giving. It was rare, he thought, to find someone like her. And rarer still to meet someone who had no idea just how extraordinary they were. When Emma finally returned to his table with his meal, she set it down with a practiced ease. "Enjoy," she said with a polite smile before turning to leave, but Daniel stopped her with a quiet, "Wait." She glanced back, tilting her head slightly. "Yes." He leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Do you remember helping a homeless boy on the street last week?" For the first time that day, Emma's confident composure wavered. Her brows furrowed, and she blinked at him in surprise. "Yes, I do," she said slowly. "How do you know about that?" Daniel smiled faintly, though there was something knowing in his eyes. "Let's just say I saw something that night. A young woman who didn't just walk past someone in need, but stopped, cared, and gave. That's not something most people would do." Emma felt a sudden rush of warmth in her cheeks, not used to being on the receiving end of such recognition. She shrugged, forcing a small laugh. "It was nothing, really. He needed help, so I did what anyone would." Daniel shook his head. "No. Not anyone." Before she could reply, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it toward her along with the bill. "This is for you," he said, his voice quieter now. "Open it after I leave." With that, he stood, offering her one last look before walking out of the diner. Emma stared after him for a long moment, confused and unsure what to make of his words. Then, with a cautious breath, she unfolded the note. Her hands trembled as her eyes landed on the check inside. $50,000. Beneath the staggering amount was a single handwritten message: "Your kindness has inspired me. Use this to create the future you deserve. A grateful stranger." Emma's heart pounded as she clutched the check, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Who was this man? Why had he given her such an unbelievable gift? And why, despite his calm demeanor, did it feel like he knew her in a way she couldn't quite understand? Emma's hands trembled as she stared at the check, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. $50,000. It wasn't just a generous tip, it was life-changing. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts as she read the handwritten message again, the words blurring together in her shock. "Your kindness has inspired me. Use this to create the future you deserve." Who was he? Why would a complete stranger give her something like this? She looked up, her eyes darting toward the door as if hoping to catch one last glimpse of him, but he was already gone. The sleek black car that had been parked outside had disappeared, leaving nothing behind but the lingering question of who Daniel Carter really was. For the rest of the night, Emma found herself in a daze, her fingers brushing over the edges of the check as she worked, her thoughts tangled in confusion and disbelief. She didn't tell anyone, not her coworkers, not her boss, because the whole thing felt surreal, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment. By the time she got home, exhaustion weighed on her like a heavy blanket, but sleep didn't come easily. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at the check under the dim glow of the overhead light, her thoughts racing. A part of her wanted to convince herself it was a mistake, that somehow, this couldn't be real. People like her didn't just stumble into life-changing amounts of money overnight. And yet, the check was real, the ink scrawled across it undeniably permanent. She thought about the bills piling up, about her younger sister's tuition, about the way she had always dreamed of opening a small cafe, a place where anyone, rich or poor, could come in and find warmth, kindness, and a hot meal. $50,000 wouldn't be enough to build an entire future, but it was enough to take the first step. And yet, something about it didn't sit right with her. She had spent her entire life working for everything she had, scraping by, making do with what little she earned. To accept this money felt undeserved. It wasn't that she didn't need it, she did, desperately, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had to return it. The problem was, she had no way of finding him. There was no phone number, no contact information, no instructions on how to reach out. He had simply left it there, walking out of her life as quickly as he had stepped into it. The thought left a strange emptiness in her chest, a nagging sense of unfinished business. She needed answers. But even as she wrestled with her uncertainty, one undeniable truth remained: her life had just changed forever. The days passed, but Emma couldn't shake the weight of the check burning a hole in her pocket. She carried it with her everywhere, folded neatly, untouched, yet impossible to forget. Every time she reached for her wallet to pay for a cup of coffee or bus fare, she would feel it there, a reminder of the unanswered questions swirling in her mind. Who was Daniel Carter, really? Why had he given her this money? What did he see in her that made him believe she deserved it? She had no way to contact him, no way to return what felt like an overwhelming act of generosity. And yet, deep down, a part of her feared that maybe, just maybe, this was fate's way of giving her a chance she had never dared to hope for. Still, doubt gnawed at her. She didn't tell her sister about the money, didn't confide in anyone at the diner. She worked her shifts as usual, forcing herself to act as if nothing had changed, though in reality, everything had. Her mind constantly ran in circles: should she keep the money? Should she try to find him? Should she simply pretend it never happened? The uncertainty weighed on her, making it impossible to fully embrace the opportunity in front of her. It wasn't until nearly a week later that she realized she couldn't go on like this. She needed to do something. She needed to at least try. So, one evening after her shift, she made a decision. She would go to the bank, verify the check, and if it was real, if it truly belonged to her, she would use it not for herself, but for something that mattered. Something bigger than just paying off bills or buying herself momentary relief. If Daniel Carter had believed in her enough to give her this gift, then she would make sure it wasn't wasted. She thought about the cafe she had always dreamed of opening, the small place where no one would ever feel invisible or unworthy of kindness. Maybe this was the beginning of that dream. But just as she stepped out onto the sidewalk that night, ready to take that first step, she heard the unmistakable sound of tires slowing behind her. A sleek black car, so familiar now, pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, and there he was, Daniel Carter, watching her with the same unreadable expression he had worn the first time she had seen him. "I hoped I'd find you," he said, his voice calm but certain. Emma's heart pounded as she stared at him, questions racing through her mind, but only one managed to escape her lips. "Why?" Daniel stepped out of the car, his expression serious yet kind. "Because I owe you an explanation." Emma's breath caught in her throat as Daniel stepped onto the sidewalk, the city lights casting a soft glow against the sharp lines of his suit. The steady confidence in his voice made it clear that this wasn't some fleeting act of generosity, he had sought her out intentionally. The question burning in her mind tumbled out before she could stop it. "Why did you do it?" Her voice was quiet but firm, the weight of the check still pressed against her palm. Daniel exhaled slowly, as if he had anticipated the question but was searching for the right words. "Because I saw something that night," he admitted. "I saw someone who didn't hesitate to help a child she didn't know, someone who gave with no expectation of anything in return. I saw kindness, not the kind people do when they think someone is watching, but the kind that comes from who you are at your core." His gaze was steady, unreadable, but there was something in his voice that made Emma's pulse quicken. She tightened her grip on the check, shaking her head. "That doesn't explain why you gave me this." She held it up slightly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "This isn't just some generous tip, Mr. Carter. $50,000, it's," she hesitated, struggling to find the right word. "It's too much." Daniel studied her for a moment, then offered a small, almost amused smile. "And yet, you haven't spent it." Emma blinked at him, caught off guard. He was right. Despite the worries that weighed on her every day, the unpaid bills, the constant struggle to make ends meet, she hadn't touched the money. She had carried it with her, unsure, unsettled. Because deep down, she wasn't the kind of person who took handouts. "I don't know how to accept something like this," she admitted finally, her voice quieter now. "I've spent my whole life working for every dollar. I don't know what it feels like to just be given something." Daniel nodded as if he understood, as if he had somehow expected her to say exactly that. "That's why I came to find you," he said. "Because I don't want you to see this as a handout. I want you to see it as an investment." Emma frowned, confused. "An investment?" He took a step closer, his expression thoughtful. "I did my research, Emma. I know you've dreamed of opening your own cafe. A place where people, no matter their circumstances, can come in and feel welcome. I believe in that. I believe in you." Emma's breath hitched, the weight of his words pressing into her in a way she hadn't expected. No one had ever told her they believed in her before. No one had ever looked at her and seen potential beyond the exhaustion in her eyes and the apron tied around her waist. For a long moment, she didn't know what to say. Then, finally, she whispered, "Why me?" Daniel's smile softened. "Because you remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who believed kindness could change the world. And I think she was right." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat, the emotions she had been holding back suddenly too overwhelming to ignore. She had spent so long surviving, so long believing that dreams were for other people, for those who had the luxury of hoping for more. And yet, here was a man who had every luxury in the world, and he had chosen to believe in her. She glanced down at the check one last time, then back up at Daniel. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something bigger than she had ever imagined. Emma stood there, the city humming around her, the weight of Daniel's words settling into her bones. No one had ever looked at her and seen more than a struggling waitress scraping by, yet here he was, a man who had everything, offering her a chance to turn her quiet dream into reality. The check in her hand suddenly felt heavier, not because of its monetary value, but because of what it represented: possibility, belief, a future she had never dared to claim for herself. Her fingers tightened around it, her heart pounding as she looked up at him, still grappling with the overwhelming reality of it all. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice almost lost beneath the sound of traffic passing by. Daniel smiled, not the kind of calculated smile she imagined billionaires wore when they closed deals, but something softer, something genuine. "Then don't say anything yet," he said. "Just think about it." Emma let out a shaky breath, nodding, but deep down, she already knew her answer. She had spent years convincing herself that dreams were just that, distant, unreachable things meant for other people. But for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder, what if she was wrong? What if she really could do this? That night, she barely slept. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at the check, then at the makeshift notebook where she had scribbled ideas about her dream cafe over the years. Menu ideas, layouts, little sketches of what the space might look like, things she had never shown anyone because she never believed they would matter. And yet, Daniel Carter had seen her for who she was, had chosen to invest in something no one else had ever thought twice about. By morning, the decision was clear. She didn't just want to accept his help, she wanted to prove that he had been right about her. So, later that day, with her heart in her throat, she called the number he had left her before he drove away. "I want to do this," she told him, her voice steady despite the nerves coursing through her. "But if I do, I want to earn it. I don't want a gift, I want a chance to build something real." There was a pause, and then his voice came through the line, warm and certain. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." And just like that, everything changed. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind, unlike anything Emma had ever experienced. True to his word, Daniel didn't just hand her a check and disappear, he guided her, introduced her to people who could help, and walked her through every step of what it meant to start a business. It was overwhelming at times, terrifying even, but for the first time in her life, Emma felt like she was working towards something that truly mattered. She poured every ounce of her energy into turning the dream she had once considered impossible into something tangible. Every late-night planning session, every meeting with contractors, every lesson in finances and business management felt like a crash course in a life she had never thought she would be part of. Yet, with every step forward, she felt something inside her shift, an unfamiliar but exhilarating sense of confidence. Daniel remained a steady presence throughout it all, not hovering, not controlling, but always there when she needed guidance. He listened when she talked about her vision, about how she wanted the cafe to be a place where everyone, whether wealthy or struggling, could feel welcome. He never treated her like a charity case, never made her feel as if she owed him something, and that was what made it easier to accept his help. He had simply seen her, in a way no one else ever had, and had believed in her before she had even believed in herself. The cafe space itself was small but perfect, nestled on a quiet street just far enough from the chaos of the city but close enough that people would stumble upon it. Emma spent hours obsessing over every detail, from the warm, inviting decor to the affordable but high-quality menu. She wanted this place to feel like home to anyone who walked through the doors. Slowly, piece by piece, it all started coming together. One evening, as she locked up the cafe after another long day of renovations, she turned to find Daniel leaning against his car, watching her with something unreadable in his expression. "You're really doing it," he said, more a statement than a question. Emma exhaled, wiping a streak of paint from her cheek. "Yeah," she murmured, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "I really am." He smiled, and for a moment, they just stood there, two people who had come from completely different worlds yet had somehow crossed paths in a way that had changed both of them forever. The day finally came when the cafe was ready to open. Emma stood in front of the glass doors just before sunrise, the golden morning light reflecting off the sign she had spent weeks designing, Harper's Cafe. She traced the letters with her fingertips, a quiet disbelief settling in her chest. This was real. This was hers. A place she had built from nothing but a dream and the faith of a man who had once been a stranger. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the door and stepped inside, inhaling the scent of freshly brewed coffee and newly polished wood. The space was everything she had imagined, warm, inviting, filled with soft lighting and the kind of quiet charm that made people want to linger. The menu was simple but crafted with care, designed to be affordable while still offering quality, because no one should ever have to choose between a meal and their dignity. As she prepared for the first day of business, the weight of what she had accomplished settled over her. It wasn't just about serving coffee or pastries. It was about creating a space where people felt safe, where kindness wasn't just an afterthought but the foundation of everything. As she placed a "Grand Opening" sign in the window, the door swung open, and Daniel Carter stepped inside, looking around with quiet admiration. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with something close to pride. Emma exhaled, laughing softly as she wiped her hands on her apron. "I did. And you were right, I just needed a chance." Daniel smiled but shook his head. "I didn't do this, Emma. You did." There was something in his voice that made her chest tighten, something honest and unguarded, a reminder that this wasn't about money or charity. It was about belief, hers in herself and his in her potential. As the morning rush began, people filtered in, drawn by the inviting scent of coffee and the warmth of a place that felt like home. Emma greeted each one with the same kindness she had always carried with her, except this time, she was doing it in a space that was entirely her own. By the time the afternoon rolled around, the cafe was buzzing with life. Regulars from the diner came to support her, strangers walked in and stayed longer than they intended, and a few familiar faces, those she had helped in passing over the years, found their way inside, their gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. Emma stole a glance at Daniel, who sat near the corner with a quiet, knowing look in his eyes. He raised his coffee mug slightly, a silent toast to everything she had built. She smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. This wasn't just a cafe. It was proof that kindness, no matter how small, could change everything. The story of Emma Brooks teaches us that kindness, resilience, and belief in oneself can lead to life-changing opportunities, even in the most unexpected ways. In 2025, as the world continues to evolve with rapid technological advancements, economic uncertainties, and social challenges, Emma's journey reminds us of the power of human connection. Her selflessness, shown in small everyday acts of generosity, led to a profound impact, not just for herself, but for those around her. It teaches us that even when we feel invisible, the good we put into the world does not go unnoticed. Someone is always watching, and sometimes, fate aligns in ways we could never predict. This story also emphasizes the importance of taking chances. Emma was hesitant to accept help, believing she had to struggle alone, but through Daniel's guidance, she realized that opportunity is not something to be feared, it is something to be embraced. In 2025, we should remember that success is often a combination of hard work and the willingness to accept support when it comes our way. Whether in business, relationships, or personal growth, we must be open to new possibilities, even if they feel unfamiliar or undeserved at first. Lastly, Emma's journey highlights the idea that true wealth is not measured by money, but by the impact we have on others. Daniel, despite his fortune, found meaning not in material success, but in investing in someone who truly deserved a chance. As we navigate our own paths in 2025, this serves as a reminder that generosity, whether through time, resources, or simple acts of kindness, can transform lives. The lesson is clear: no matter where we come from or how much we have, kindness has the power to change the world. Emma's journey from a struggling waitress to a cafe owner is truly inspiring, but this is just the beginning. She built Harper's Cafe with kindness at its core, creating a space where everyone feels welcome. Now, the question is, what comes next? Should she expand her cafe to help even more people? Should she start a program to provide meals for the homeless? Or maybe she could mentor others who, like her, just need someone to believe in them. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What advice would you give Emma as she steps into this new chapter of her life? What challenges do you think she might face, and how should she overcome them? Drop your comments below and let's keep this conversation going. Your ideas and support could help shape the next steps of her journey.